12,900 years ago, the world was warming up. The Ice Age was ending. Mammoths were retreating north, forests were creeping back across the tundra. Life, for the first time in 10,000 years, was getting easier. And then, in the span of a single human lifetime, maybe less, the planet slammed the door shut again. Temperatures crashed, glaciers that had been melting for millennia stopped and began advancing. Some regions dropped by 10 degrees Celsius in a matter of decades. Not centuries, decades. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas. The people who lived through it didn't have a name for it. They just had to survive it. And today, we're going to find out how and what it cost them. Here's what makes this story different from every other Ice Age video you've seen. This wasn't a slow, creeping freeze that gave people generations to adapt. This was, geologically speaking, almost instant. Ice cores drilled in Greenland show the temperature shift happening in as little as a decade in some records, fast enough that a person could be born into a warming world and die in a frozen one. Put yourself there for a second. You're a hunter-gatherer in what's now Northern Europe. The rivers you fish are freezing over earlier every year. The herds you follow are vanishing. The berries your grandmother taught you to find aren't growing anymore. And you have no idea why. No satellites, no ice cores, no science. Just cold, hunger, and a world that no longer makes sense. This is a story about that terror. But it's also a story about something else. How the human species almost didn't make it through, and the quiet, stubborn ingenuity that got us here anyway. So, what caused it? The leading theory goes back to a giant lake you've probably never heard of, Glacial Lake Agassiz, an enormous body of meltwater trapped behind the retreating ice sheets of North America, bigger than every Great Lake combined. As the ice dams holding it back gave way, a catastrophic flood of fresh water surged into the North Atlantic Ocean. That might sound harmless. It wasn't. The Atlantic Ocean has a current, scientists call it the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, that acts like the planet's central heating system. It carries warm water north and helps regulate the climate of the entire northern hemisphere. A massive pulse of fresh, cold meltwater diluted the salty water that drives this current, and the current stalled. The heating system shut off. Within years, not centuries, Europe and much of North America plunged back into Ice Age conditions. Some estimates suggest parts of the Northern Hemisphere cooled by up to 10 degrees Celsius. Forests died, glaciers that had been in retreat for thousands of years surged forward again. It lasted, by most estimates, over 1,000 years, roughly from 12,900 to 11,700 years ago. For the humans living through it, none of this had a name. There was no cause. There was only the cold arriving and staying. This is where the story stops being about ice cores and starts being about people. Across Europe, Ice Age populations that had spent thousands of years spreading out and thriving were suddenly forced to contract. Archaeological evidence shows populations shrinking, retreating into smaller pockets of livable land, often clustering into what researchers call refugia. Sheltered valleys, coastlines, and river systems where enough food remained to sustain small groups. Some groups didn't make it. Genetic and archaeological evidence suggests entire regional populations across parts of Europe were wiped out or displaced during this period, their cultures and tool-making traditions vanishing from the record. But others adapted, and how they adapted tells us something remarkable about the human mind. In the Near East, some communities did something almost no one expects from cavemen. Instead of just chasing dwindling herds, they began deliberately gathering and cultivating wild grains, wheat, barley, rye, as insurance against unpredictable food sources. Many researchers believe this desperate, cold-driven experimentation is one of the sparks that eventually led to the invention of agriculture, one of the most consequential turning points in human history, born not out of comfort, but out of crisis. Think about that. The Younger Dryas may have terrified our ancestors into inventing farming. Elsewhere, survival looked more immediate. Tighter social bonds, shared shelters, more efficient hunting technology, smaller, more precise stone tools optimized for hunting scarce game. Evidence of increased use of fire, tailored clothing, and semi-permanent shelters all cluster around this period. People weren't just enduring the cold, they were innovating against it in real time, without knowing if it would ever end. Every stitch in a hide cloak, every fire kept burning through the night, every hard decision about who eats and who doesn't, these were the margins between a family's survival and its extinction. Try to imagine it honestly. You don't know this is temporary. You don't know it's called the Younger Dryas, or that it will end in about 1,200 years. As far as you know, this is the world now, forever. The warmth your parents told you about might be a story your children never believe. Every winter, the question isn't, will it be a hard year? It's, will we still be a family when spring comes, if spring comes at all? And yet, they kept going. They taught their children to track animals across ice they'd never seen before. They passed down fire-making. They buried their dead with what little they had, which tells us they still made room for grief, for ritual, for meaning, even in the middle of survival. That's the part of this story that hits hardest. It's not just that they survived the physics of a collapsing climate, it's that they held on to being human while doing it. Around 11,700 years ago, almost as abruptly as it began, the Younger Dryas ended. Temperatures rebounded in some records within a matter of decades. The AMOC current restarted. The world warmed into the climate we still live in today, the geological era we call the Holocene. But the people who walked out of that 1,000-year winter were not the people who walked into it. The population bottlenecks reshaped the genetic map of early humans. The farming experiments born from desperation in the Near East didn't stop when the ice retreated. They expanded, eventually giving rise to the first permanent settlements, then villages, then cities, then everything we call civilization. In a very real sense, the hardest winter our ancestors ever survived may have been the ember that eventually lit the modern world. Here's the uncomfortable part. The Younger Dryas isn't just an ancient curiosity. It's proof that Earth's climate system has tipping points, thresholds where a slow, gradual change can suddenly flip into something abrupt and extreme. Modern climate scientists study this event closely because the same ocean current that shut down 12,900 years ago, the AMOC, is being monitored today as fresh water from melting ice sheets flows into the North Atlantic once again. Our ancestors didn't have the science to see it coming. We do. That's not meant to end this video on despair. It's meant to end it on respect. Respect for a species that has already been pushed to the edge by a collapsing climate once before and clawed its way back, not with technology we'd recognize, but with cooperation, ingenuity, and sheer refusal to disappear. Somewhere roughly 12,000 years ago, a person sat by a dying fire in a winter that had already lasted longer than anyone could remember. They didn't know their descendants would build cities, write books, or one day tell this story on a screen glowing in the dark. They just knew they had to make it through one more night. They did. And because they did, so did we. If you want to see how our ancestors survived the next great climate disaster, the one that came after this, hit subscribe because that story is even wilder than this one.